wish I could smell this. It's just so fragrant. The dog roses are starting to bloom. It's a good year for roses out here. We're dodging springtime showers and doing a little walk. And it's been a bit since I've done a walk and talk with you, so I thought we'd do that today. First of all, some of you, you guys are so good about remembering things. I'm horrible. My son, he got delayed in arriving, so he comes this Sunday, and he's bringing a friend that I get to introduce you to, so that's fun. And then news today, I finally got it. I got the email from the prefecture for my visa renewal. So my type of visa, I can't renew online. Certain visas, like your, say you're here retired, you can renew those online. But my type of visa, you can't. So I have to go in. So I've got a few more weeks left to put my dossier together. It will be the biggest one yet. Instead of 6 inches, it's going to be 12 inches. I'm so nervous, but I'm just excited also to get this monkey off my back, because it's just, you know, such a big thing to always have over you as a foreigner here. Renewing your visa or your residence permit, in my case, it's just such a big thing, and it's so difficult. There's so much paperwork to do. So, whew, I'm gonna be so glad when it's over, it's submitted. And I know also that there's a lot of people who have to wait a long time for their cards to be ready, or they get delayed. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen to me, but who knows? There's the girls. So the walk and talk today is sort of a combination of questions that I've received and personal observations, especially as an American living in rural France, and I've lived in lots of different places. It's also an extension of a presentation I published on YouTube about where to live in France. You know, it's sort of a fun quiz or game to play with you to figure out where in France you might find yourself and be happy. Maybe not in a giant mud pit like this, but we've had so much rain the last couple of days. Let's see. So the first thing that I wanted to address was questions that I get about when I drive through villages or film them, or small towns, and people are like, where is everybody? You know, who lives there when there's just like nobody around? Who lives in these places? That then ties into sort of a personal observation in regards to, as an example, American socializations within neighborhoods versus French and how they socialize, or maybe the lack thereof. And then finally, that then goes into purchasing in rural France, especially those ones that are really cheap that you see for like 50,000, 60,000. And the difference between being, again, my experience, American and risk adverse versus what I've noticed with those coming from the UK. All the fields around here are getting prepped. Usually in this area, it's like some years we've got wheat, the other year is corn. I think this is a corn year. It's not sweet corn like in the States, unfortunately. It's more like a feed corn. It's not very, you can't eat it. Finding sweet corn is difficult here. It's one of the things that I want to grow, because like that and poblano peppers, shishito peppers, stuff like that. There's certain things that I miss food-wise from the States. So when I film sometimes in small towns, villages, places like that, I often do it during the lunch hours so that I can film it without a lot of people around, especially children, because there's regulations and filming minors in France. As there should be. And but let's quickly clarify what the difference is. So in France, a population with a certain density of over 2,000 people is technically considered a city here. So we might consider that, depending upon where you're from, like a small town or a hamlet. But here, that's considered a city. All right, so then less than 2,000 is like a town. You've got like towns, hamlets, villages, right? So it's not going to look or feel like there's a lot of people, because there isn't. Back in the States, I lived in Portland, Oregon area for quite a while, and that's where I owned my PR marketing agency. And I lived in a neighborhood called the Alameda District, and my neighbors on that street were just incredible. Like, especially during the warmer months, like spring through early autumn, it would just like, people would kind of come out of their houses. There'd be impromptu little street parties and get-togethers, and it was just so normal that everybody would just kind of congregate on the street and talk to each other. In the States and all the places I've lived, where your neighbors will just come out onto the street, you'll get stopped, you'll come onto your property and talk to you. That's not the case here in my experience. The French are very private, and so you also don't have really open properties. Part of that is for legality purposes. Sometimes it's just the property is so old that it has these big old stone walls around it. But long and short of it is that a lot of your interior gardens, courtyards, everything, they're on the inside of the property, and then you've got the houses or the buildings surrounding it, right? So you can't see everybody. You can't see what they're doing. You can't see inside, because it's a sense of privacy and security, and it's how the homes were constructed, especially your older ones, right? I'm sure if you've driven through some more rural places in France, you've noticed that there's like these big stone walls, right? You might have some windows on the street side, but you can't see what's inside the property. Unlike, say, in the States, where like you might have a fence this high, but you can generally see what's going on, especially if there's a party in the backyard. And you know, that's it's not that people aren't there. It's that they're cached, they're hidden, they're in their little courtyards and spaces. People generally don't like congregate and gather on the streets here. Your longest line and group of people probably in the morning line for the bakery to get the fresh bread and croissants. And to be invited over to some place is generally planned, and it's takes a while for them to get to know you and invite you over. I've got, let me think about this. I basically have had 2 neighbors now out here in Brittany invite me over to their house. The rest of my neighbors, while they're very sweet and kind and friendly, I've never been invited over. So as an introvert, I don't mind that at all. In fact, it's my preference and one of the reasons why I live out here. But I think for people who like socializing a lot, and again, in my presentation, it sort of identifies that, then you probably would be happiest in like a town to a large city. The problem with large cities like Paris is that then you become anonymous a bit, because unless you're willing to really put yourself out there and meet your immediate neighbors, people still kind of stay closed off and private. I think privacy is a big word here, you know, and it's just a different cultural thing, which again, I don't mind. Also, if you are looking for a lot of culture, diversity, music, different age groups, then you probably don't want to be out here in rural France, because when you think about it from the job and workforce opportunities out here, unless it's sort of a business family enterprise, they want to be farmers, our younger generations are going to the big cities to find work. That's where the tech is. That's where the entrepreneurship is. That's where the opportunities are. You're not going to find them out here. So a lot of the reason also why some of these places look a little bit desolate is because they kind of are. You have mostly retired or aging people still living in these villages. So hopefully that kind of gives you a different perspective. What's a difference between a city or town in France versus a village or hamlet? And also why some of those might have the appearance of not having a lot of people in them. And the other question I often get is, are they livable? Well, I guess that depends upon on how you like to live. That also goes back to that presentation of where to live in France and that quiz. I've lived in all sorts of different sizes of places, from Paris all the way down to where I'm at now, which is not near anything. Like, I can't even walk to any service. I've lived in little hamlet where it had a tiny mairie and one restaurant, and that was it. It was a big deal the day that they got a baguette vending machine. So I guess it just depends upon you as an individual. But then let's continue that conversation, right? About those really cheap houses for 50 to 60K. Obviously, you're not going to get those in cities or towns or anything like that, right? That is rural France. So you're going to be living like that. Are you okay with it? The second thing, and that kind of goes into like the conversation of socialization and friendship. My British friends here are a bit more like an American style experience for me, where they often have more parties, more get-togethers, Sunday suppers, things like that. Well, my brother's American, but he lives in England. So if you're not familiar, there's a region in France called Dordogne, and there is a nickname of Dordogne-shire, because so many British move down there and will actually take over, like, there's entire hamlets and villages of just expats. And so that changes, as I'm sure you can see, the entire like ambiance, environment, aesthetic, and experience. And some people want that. They want to move to and live in France, but they want to be in entire expat communities. There are small towns near me here in Brittany that may not be quite to that extent, but like the majority, there's a majority of expats that live in those villages, and that changes things, right? The type of events, language requirements, how they're interacting with each other. It's not my preference to live like that. I didn't move halfway around the world to live in an expat community, but some want that comfort or experience. I bring all of that up to also make another point, because I feel like there's a distinct difference between, say, somebody from the States, Canada, or Australia moving here versus my British friends. Let me explain why. So, another perspective, France is the size of Texas, and England is often referred to as being the same size as Oregon, okay? Growing up in Oregon, my family often, during the summers, we went camping, and we very rarely left the state, because driving all the way from Oregon to, say, like Washington or California was a much longer trip, just to even physically get there. And you didn't want to waste the time doing that, so you stayed within state. But we got to go camping and experience a lot of things in and around the state, and it was really a lot of fun. Think about it from a British standpoint, right? Same thing. They bring their camping cars down, they go camping here. It's an affordable, easy family vacation. You just pop over on a ferry and you're in France the next day over, right? So when you are purchasing, let's kind of then take that same mentality, right? That France is the next state over for those coming from the UK, versus some of us who have to travel halfway around the world. It's a different commitment, right? We can't just like load up our stuff when we want to quit onto a truck, put it onto a ferry, and go back home. Completely different scenario here. All right, so then let's fast forward that same story. Let's pretend now that we are adults, no longer kids. We don't want to go camping anymore. We want a nice little cabin in the woods, right? So let's say, as an Oregonian, I want it to feel like a little bit more of a vacation. So I'm going to find an old rundown cabin in the woods in Washington, and I might go up on the weekends and fix it up, kind of camp in it, you know, and eventually it becomes livable, and I might even have dreams of retiring to it at some point. That's sort of the same thing with those cheaper properties here in France. I feel like, especially in my experience, I never even considered those sorts of properties because I'm too risk adverse. And also I didn't have the means to do those repairs on my own. In France, if it's inside the walls, it does not require a permit to do the work. Okay, so but you need permits or approval for any exterior work. Roof, windows, doors, anything that is visible on the outside needs approval from the mairie or a permit. But anything on the inside, tearing down walls, moving toilets, electrical work, all that stuff doesn't require a permit. Now, are there complications possibly when you go to sell it and not having the proper documentation? Sure, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. So that's sort of what happens, right? Is that some of the people that I know from the UK come down on the weekends or have long work vacations and will renovate these homes that have various states of disrepair. They've been abandoned, they're derelicts. Some of these houses have like no toilets, no running water, no electricity, and people will come down and camp in them, right? But if you think about it, what's the difference between that and dry camping? Not much, if you like that sort of thing. They're all so pretty. So I'm going to make a spot of tea and get back to work, but hopefully that gave you some interesting perspectives in regards to a few different things that we talked about today. If you have questions, leave them in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts on these subjects, and I'm always very open to any additional walk and talk ideas that you might have. I think it's a lot of fun to have these conversations with you. I also want to share this. A lot of you know Mariage Frere, but this Rose Royale tea, I love it. I love it so much. Rose Royale. So there you have it. Yeah, and of course, the majority of Americans can't get mortgages here in France. It's even getting difficult for the French. After COVID, it became really difficult. A lot of banks were saying no. So same, of course, thing goes for Canadians, Australians, other people. So, oh, guess I have somebody at the door. I'm gonna say goodbye. Bisous, darlings. Bye. I have been batting absolutely zero today. I wanted to take you to a thrift store. Then they didn't allow the dogs in there. So then I went to a different one. Also didn't allow the girls, but I left them in the car to check it out. Said it was the first permanent vide grenier in all of France. But so I decided to bring the girls to the beach so they can have some fun. And then we're gonna try and go to one more. I've got high hopes for it. The weather has been so bad lately that I haven't been able to go to any vide greniers. And I want to introduce you to this chain of thrift shops because it's a great alternative if you don't have time to go to a vide on a Sunday or the weather's bad. And you can find this chain all throughout France. So let's hope the next one is good, but let's take the girls onto the beach first before we go to that one. Oh, he's a sand flea. Are you a sand flea? What a nice beach. Are you so happy? Isn't this so nice? Are you so happy? You gonna go in the waters? Pearl, it's too far. There you go. All right, everybody, fingers crossed. We're gonna find some good stuff inside here. All right. Match the dining room table legs. I love how the dark color here plays off of the beams and the old armoire, as well as the wood stove. All of it. It's perfect.